So, what are factors of development that we could consider social? Let's just go around popcorn style. What might be some social factors?
Education.
Yeah, sure. Gender equality, really good one. Discrimination. Sure. These are all good ideas. But be glad that you came to this presentation because you missed some. Next slide. So, culture, tradition, and values. Next slide. So, this is a quote from some really smart dude at Harvard. He said, "If we learn anything from economic development, it's that culture makes all the difference." And I would agree. Next slide. So where is the intersection of culture and economy? Well, first of all, having like a strong culture in a nation or in an economy can prompt a boost in the economy, boost in development from tourism. You could look at like a lot of countries, a large percentage of the income coming into their countries from tourism. Even if we think about like India, how there's a lot of things set up sort of for tourists, and that brings money into the country. For example, like 2.1% of people employed in Colombia have jobs in sort of the cultural sector. So it's like, it's twofold. It's tourism, but also it's like a different sector of the economy is selling things, setting up events that relate to culture. But like on the flip side, sometimes capitalizing on a culture in order to help economic development, it can cause like that culture sort of to be changed in a bad way. And that's kind of what Bhutan is afraid of in that they put in place this thing where not many tourists have access to their culture because they want the culture to remain for the people and not like as a prop of the economy. Next slide. So culture could also exist as soft power, and that kind of helps with economic development. That's it, like, you know, that could make the difference between being like a core periphery country and a core country, is sort of spreading that power all over the world, and then like it brings in money. We can look at like the example of South Korean K-pop. It's become an industry worldwide, and so it's fundamentally it's bringing money and resources into South Korea and like boosting its economy. Yeah. Another thing is having like strong culture, people being in touch with their culture. It actually helps improve well-being. For example, there's been studies done with Indigenous groups in Canada that show that like the more present culture is, the less likely it is for Indigenous youths to commit suicide. And I think that like that's a pretty extreme example because that's like after a cultural genocide. But I think like across the board, being in touch with cultural values and tradition can in many cases help improve well-being because it gives you that other source of purpose other than maybe like the economic things. Yeah. Next slide. So culture is, you know, it's three things. It's the culture that you show to the world, the culture that you do for yourself, and then also culture could be things like, you know, how involved you feel like you have to be with your family, different things like that. And that also can affect development. For example, in the US, where I'm from, there's a very individualist culture. So like, a lot of what success is determined by is my own personal success without really the strings attached of my family or community. While if you come from a different culture, your success might be more, you know, it might be more tied to helping your family, that kind of thing. So culture and how like societies interact is also, it plays a role in how people live their lives, and so it plays a role in economic development. But this is, of course, less tangible than, say, like ceremonies or things that you sell at tourism counters or things like that. And that's all for culture, traditions, and values.
Okay, so we move on.
I'm so sorry.
So we move on. As someone in the crowd said,
Something very important in social factors is gender equality. That's why we grow gender truly matters. And in this case, we're talking specifically about women. As you know, we are in a um, patriarch- patriarchy, so it was built specifically for men, and we're trying to get it better. Next slide. So, women's rights escalate economic development. This is a connection between the social factor and economic development. Here, I wrote some specific parts that is written in the um, side, like the organization part of the UN that talks about like women's development. It says when more women work, economies grow. This basically means that women's economic empowerment boosts productivity, increases economic diversification and income equality in addition to other positive outcomes. It is very important because at the end, recognizing that growth does not out. It's very important, however, to recognize that growth doesn't really lead to a complete like inequality, complete equality in gender, and we have to like work on it. And it's also estimated that gender gaps cost the economy some 15% of GDP, which I think is really important to emphasize. Next, we have increasing women and girls' educational attainment contributes to women's economic empowerment and more inclusive economic growth. This basically means that education, giving women skills and work will help them so that when they enter the labor market, they're able to like participate more and they're given more space, and this will also help the economic grow. Then we got women's economic equality is good for business. This basically means that companies greatly benefit from increasing employment and leadership opportunities for women, which is shown to increase organizational effectiveness and growth because women have great skills that really can come into account when it comes to companies. And it is estimated that companies with three or more women in senior management functions score higher in all dimensions of organizational performance. And it's an actual study. Then, women's economic empowerment is central to realizing women's rights and gender equality. This means that women's economic empowerment includes women's ability to participate equally in existing markets, their access to and control over productive resources, access to decent work, control over their own times, lives, and bodies, and increasing voice, agency, and meaningful participation in economic decision making at all levels from the household to international levels. And then we got empowering women in the economy and closing gender gaps in the world of work are key to achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. See how I like connected this to here? Yes, because if we really want to attain those that agenda for sustainable development, we really need to keep empowering women specifically to escalate this economic development as a social factor so we can try and achieve it because women are a very important part of the economy. Next. Next, we're going to talk about a little bit about discrimination. Next. Basically, discrimination, there are 5 facets that currently are being taking place when it comes to gender discrimination. One of them is education. The second one is property, like women are not able to get properties as easy as men. Then we got employment opportunities because sometimes they prefer a man over a woman when it comes to like interviewing people for positions, even if they have the same level of education beforehand. Then we also have economic freedom because there are many countries in which they cannot even like have their own money, but rather the man is the one to take care of its bank accounts and everything. So women do not have enough economic freedom as of yet. And then also empowerment. Next. And then just talking about a little case study, which is Nepal. And this is more about how women empowerment can really help to the development. In this case study, Finland, which is one of the countries considered the most about gender equality when it comes to women in the economic market, they created this connection with Nepal to help them as well. And these have greatly seen an impact on the Nepali society because there has been an improved
climate resilience, and health through sustainable water supply, sanitation, hygiene, and livelihood development because of these women participating more in society. Similarly, an inclusive education system has been put into account. Equality and prosperity for all women and girls, including those with disabilities and those in vulnerable positions. Gender equality and social inclusion are also cross-cutting objectives in this development cooperation. And we'll probably see in the future how this keeps growing, hopefully for the better. Of course, it's not all in the bright side. There's still a lot of discrimination, especially in the poverty sides of Nepal. But at least this is an initiative that can start for them to achieve more of an equality when it comes to the social factor.
Okay, so the second to last kind of social factor is migration. Human migration is the movement of people from one place to another with the intention of settling either permanently or temporarily in this new location. And it's a large contributor to globalization as people are kind of moving around the globe, and that leads to kind of sharing of ideas and different religions and technologies and cultures. So yes, globalization, and it can be both positive and negative for development in the countries that the people are migrating to, as well as the countries that people are migrating from. Migration, when people move to another country, can cause an influx of people into the workforce in this host country, and so it kind of ties into economic development in this way. If there's a lot of people entering a country into the workforce, it can help reduce any labor shortages in that country, and because it often introduces a labor force which is more likely to take on lower skilled or lower wage paying jobs. So it can, in this way, kind of boost the labor force and economic growth of a country, which in turn kind of elevates the GDP of the country, contributing to development. This can be used beneficially by countries with kind of younger workforces to increase the quantity of labor in the countries. Also, the people in these workforces who are migrants, will often send money back to their families in other countries, which can help them come out of poverty or increase access to basic human needs like education, food, housing, as well as adding to the GDP of these other countries. And so in this way, it also kind of increases the development of other countries where the migrants are coming from. Additionally, there's something called social remittance, which is when in addition to money and resources, ideas are also sent back and kind of values. So this kind of ties into globalization, whereas migrants migrate to different countries, and then they work there, and they kind of experience new ways of life, maybe have different values and different education systems, and then these what they've learned is then shared with people at home, and so that can help develop human rights in other countries. Which ties into human development and freedoms and increases development there. But also, large amounts of migrants in any country can put a strain on their public services sector, and even cause prices of services such as education or healthcare to rise, which is not very good for development, because then people don't have as easy access to basic needs. Additionally, the outward migration, so like migration from one country to another, can cause brain drain from this home country. So it's often younger populations who are leaving the country in order to find better work or what they think will be a better life, which is then how they send money back to their families to support them. But this often leads to kind of all of the people who are productive in the labor force leaving. And so that negatively affects development in the country where people are leaving from. It can also lead to gender imbalance, and a loss of working age population, a loss of educated people, which all poses threats to development in that country. Additionally, when people are migrating into countries, if that country is like discouraging migration, it can often be forced to go kind of underground, and be like illegal migration can take place, which can result in people smuggling or slavery, and then which is obviously violations of human rights, which goes against kind of the goals of development in many of the indices of development and ways of measuring it. Yes. And so that goes against human freedoms and human development. Yeah. So countries which have suffered from the brain drain and loss, still the same, yes, and loss of skilled labor force through migration, leading to lower than expected rates of development, can include countries such as the Philippines, where many people are migrating to the UAE, to Saudi Arabia, to Hong Kong, and to many other countries for better job opportunities, which is resulting in less development economically and in terms of losing workforce and educated population in the Philippines. Another different case study is in the US, where kind of there's mixed views on migration into the country. And it's kind of a positive case study, despite some kind of negative thoughts towards it. Between 2010 and 2020, the US saw its slowest population growth of any decade since the 1930s. And 14% of the population in 2019 was made up of immigrants. And so in the US, immigration actually leads to kind of supplementing a decreasing workforce. Lots of people think that migrants are like taking away their jobs, but in reality, they're not. They're taking jobs that need to be filled. Yeah. Also, immigrants are often highly entrepreneurial, launching new companies at twice the rate of native-born Americans and creating a large number of jobs in the States. And so actually the immigration causes jobs to be created. And so this can increase employment opportunities for people who are born in the States, and it boosts wages and strengthens kind of the middle class there. And a similar thing has happened with Venezuelan migrants into Colombia. There are over 2.5 million people who have migrated between the two countries. And while many of them are still poor while in Colombia, Colombia is slowly kind of investing in infrastructure for them. And so now they're becoming contributing members of the economy. And this provides increased household consumption, increased labor force, and is causing Colombia's economy to grow at the fastest rate it has in a very, very long time. A negative case study might be in Jordan, where over 10% of the population is made up of migrants, and this is putting a lot of pressure on their education systems, on their healthcare systems, so like on all of their public services, because there's so many migrants that it's straining what the services that they can provide. Now we can move on. Not in that direction. Yeah. Okay. So, and then the last thing that kind of is encompassed under social factors is efficacy of national and local institutions. And so these are things like banks, healthcare systems, and like local governments. And so they are significant stakeholders in growth and development in any nation, because they're how most aspects of development are kind of implemented into society, is through these local and national institutions, whether it's housing, education services, protection of the environment, distribution of income, or kind of a variety of other things. This is how they're distributed into the general population. And these institutions kind of operate at a lower kind of grassroots level compared to larger government bodies. And so they have better local knowledge and adaptability and more kind of just expertise in implementing these aspects of development efficiently within communities. And so by implementing development through these institutions, it can be much more effective than just the larger kind of government of a country making decisions and trying to affect development. And that is all. Yay. Social factors.
Any questions?
Any questions?